So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Southland Regional Meeting. Happy 2026. Uh, I'm hoping things get better. It's been kind of a rough start, I think, for a lot of people. So setting a slightly higher bar than last year. And I guess the good news is we're here to talk about money. And I'll say that I have a guest speaker here today with us. Larry and I go way back, probably 20 something years. He worked for the Trust for Public Land, and I worked for the Trust for Public Land. So we knew each other through that avenue, but he's a grant advisor. And if you're looking to write grant proposals from government or private foundations, he's somebody that can provide a little guidance to you, from research to strategy to program design, everything from nonprofits to collaboratives. So he is a good strategic partner to have in your court, and I will pass it along to Larry. If I didn't do justice to your background, Larry, feel free to add on to that. But we're ready and willing to listen, and we have about 25 minutes or 20 minutes or so, I think, and then 10 minutes of Q&A. So
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Melanie. It's great to see you again. I worked for TPL. It's now been, well, I guess it's 20 years since I left. I started in 98 and I was there about 6 years. So anyway, um, and that introduced me to the world of conservation and environment, et cetera, et cetera. Um, since then, I've been doing different things. I've worked in the healthcare space. I've worked in um, workforce development, career counseling, just very eclectic. And for the last 15 years or so, I've had my own practice um, where I offered a variety of services. But the main thing I've been doing for the past, I don't know, 5 years has been grant seeking because everyone wants it. Um, and so there's a lot of potential clients out there for me who are really interested in it. Um, as opposed to, let's say, strategic planning, which people say they're interested in, but they don't want to do it. Okay. Um, so anyway, so I thought I'd just talk about my approach to grant seeking. I'm not going to talk about a lot. I'm not, a lot of people, you know, grant grant writing, they want all this advice on writing winning proposals, like say this, say that, don't say this, don't say that, use their language, in their grant guidelines or from their website, see who else they're funding, blah, blah, blah. As you write the thing. And that's super important stuff. But I want to talk about everything you do before you start writing the proposal. Because writing the grant proposal or application, it's kind of like when you buy a house, you spend 6 months looking, 3 months in escrow, and then, that day that the property changes hands and there's a check. And that's kind of it. It's the transaction at the end of a process, just like any other kind of fundraising, which I think is really important that people understand that uh, foundations, corporate funders, government agencies, they're major donors. They're like little old ladies, okay? They need to be, once you identify them, they need to be cultivated. They need to be nurtured. You need to understand what they want, what they're interested in. Because, at the end of the day, as you all know, it's human beings that staff these things. So they have the same emotional responses to interactions and et cetera as we do. So it's important to understand that. Okay. So I say grant seeking. I call myself a grant writer because that's what everyone does. It's kind of like I don't know. Everyone says Q-tips, even though they're not all Q-tips, but you just do it. So, but actually, I view it as grant seeking. I'm sorry, excuse me, grant seeking. It's a process. It's a strategy, um, and you're dealing with donors that you want to have a relationship with. that you build and sustain over time. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit. Okay. So I guess I'll also, Melanie mentioned collaboratives. You know, it's interesting. I have a client now that's a collaborative. It's really hard raising money for collaborative, not only grant writing, but also any kind of fundraising, because you tend to have competing interests within the organization. You have like a group, and there's the board is made up of the EDs of a dozen nonprofits. Well, they're doing their own fundraising. So a lot of times what you need to do is develop a protocol. Like, we want to raise money from these folks. Does anybody have a problem with that? That's the kind of thing. But it can be tough. It can be really tough. It's also hard because funders will look at the collaborative and say, I already give money to so and so. So anyhow, that's just an aside, but you mentioned it, so just want to tell that. So it's tough if you're a collaborative to raise money. Anyway, so to me, grant seeking has kind of like five basic phases. The first one is what I didn't invent this word, but I like it, conceptualization. It's what do you want to raise money for? And your understanding and of what it is, why you are fundraising. And you would be amazed at how many organizational leaders have not fully thought that through. So you need to think that through, and it depends on how your organization is organized. Um, do you have a board? Is your board your brain trust? Because some organizations, the board ain't the brain trust, right? It's like the board, it's your brain trust is, some people on the staff or some outside uh, people. So anyhow, your board and or your brain trust, there might be them, it might be your staff, it might just be you, but you got to really sit down and say, okay, this is the vision, this is what we want to do, what we need money for. And then from that comes the message, your pitch, your generic case for support. One thing I always recommend is that before you start working on any applications, sit down and do a generic case for support. And, generally the way I do it is it's kind of like what is it? Um, It's like a conglomeration. I was going to say a Chinese menu, but I don't even think they have those anymore. It's where it's like one from column A, one from column B. And I don't know if they do that, and I haven't seen that in years. But anyhow, but everything's in that case of support. You could break it into sections, you can have subheadings, whatever. But it's everything you want to say about your program or your project. That will be your source documents. And what you'll do is you'll pull from that depending on the funder that you're pitching. So rarely will you use the whole thing, but there might be pieces. Something that emphasizes, let's say, education. Maybe another one emphasizes advocacy. So you need to do that. And that's the second. The third step is researching warm prospects. What are warm prospects? Current and former funders but may not have successfully pitched. So they know who you are because you applied, but you didn't get the grant, but at least they've heard of you. Okay. Funders of lookalikes, and can ask for introductions. Community leaders, elected officials. So let me talk about each one. Current former funders, you get your list. Hopefully you have a spreadsheet at minimum. And you look at everyone on there. And first of all, if they're funders that you haven't talked to in a while, that's not good. Okay, you need to be maintaining the relationship with them. So get back in touch or stay in touch, whatever it's going to be. And talk to them. Look, they're not stupid. They know you're looking for funding. Okay. And we all know there's different ways. You don't necessarily ask right away. You sort of cultivate. So, but and that's what you do with them. Hey, this is what we're up to. This is what we're doing. If it's a former funder, this is what we've done since you last funded us, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And from that, you're going to gauge what their interest is, right? Some are going to say, thanks, hasta la vista. Others are going to say, yeah, let's talk. I think we're ready to do something with you again. So that's where you go first. Okay. Funders may not have successfully pitched. And that's going to vary. Some foundations, I'm thinking a good example is Weingart. Okay. When they turn you down, they're really nice about it and they'll talk to you. They'll say, this is why we turned you down. They'll give you meaningful feedback. Other funders, it's like no response. And that's a drag. It's unfortunate, but you got to give it a shot. So there's that. And you can learn something from them. And sometimes you may be able to go back to them later. The ones that, you learn why you didn't get funded. Um, Funders of lookalikes, and can ask for introductions. So part of this comes in the next phase, which is researching cold prospects. But in other words, uh, a lot of funders, the larger ones, the more established ones, they have websites and they're beautiful, right? And they're also bullshit. So pardon my French. So for the most part, some are actually pretty straightforward, but others are just hype. And the way you really know who a funder supports is you look at their 990s and see who they gave money to in the past. And you might go back a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. That's how you know. That's putting their money where their mouth is. Um, and when you do that, you might see, oh, they funded XYZ. I know the executive director. And you call them up and they say, would you introduce me to the program officer at ABC Foundation? Because we're interested in, unless they don't like you, they'll say yes, right? And they'll make an introduction. Boom. Now you've got a warm prospect that was a cold prospect. So that's part of what you do once you've identified what kind of funders you're interested in particular. But meanwhile, before that, you might have maybe probably all have a friend who's an executive at a similar organization or an organization that's kind of in the environmental space, but maybe a little different. And take them out to coffee and say, who funds you? And do you think there's anyone that might be interested in us? And most people are collegial and they'll talk to you. I guess some people will be, oh no, I don't want the competition, but I don't think there are very many folks like that. Um, so there's them, and then obviously community leaders, elected, and for government funding, elected officials and their staffs. They're the ones they kind of know where all the government money is, and they have a heads up that we don't have because they're talking to agency staff internally, and they're also passing legislation and approving the grant guidelines, so they see all that stuff before we do. So if you have a good relationship with an elected or their staff, talk to them. Uh, Number four, researching cold prospects, and that's a bunch of ways to do it. You can try Google. You can try. I use a search engine called the Foundation Directory Online, which is published by Candid, which is the folks who publish GuideStar. Um, I've tried them all: Instrumental, Grant Station, Grant Watch. I think FDO is the best, but only for institutional and corporate foundations, not for government. They don't really do a good job at that. So you're going to have to look at that elsewhere, and I can talk about that. But instrumental is kind of a management thing. They actually help you manage leads and stuff like that, which I don't need somebody to do that. So, but that why you may use it. But I think the search function in FDO is the best. But there's one that's better, that's new, that we've all been talking about, AI. It's just amazing. I started using it a few months ago to do research on funders, and it's actually better than the foundation directory in some ways. Now, what I do is I use both. Um, so I'll do a search on both, but it's just amazing. You can get really specific with AI, and you can get some good leads from that. So that's how you're going to do it. AI, foundation, directories, um, 990s. Once you've identified funders, looking at the 990s, a good place where you can access them easily, aside from the IRS, is GuideStar, and also ProPublica. They The only downside of ProPublica is they'll only show you the latest 990. So if you want to go back more, you got to use GuideStar. Um, and looking at website now, government. Okay, a couple of things. One, definitely register for grants.gov, the federal, even though they're not funding anything, at least anything we'd be interested in. I mean, if you want to like make bombs for the Department of Defense, yeah, they got grants on it. Um, and a few other things actually. I was a little surprised, but most of it is, you know, the kind of stuff that Donald Trump likes to fund. But anyways, it's definitely worth registering for grants.gov. I've been following it for years. Every morning they send an email out with all of the newest NOFOs. And it's just a good source, good resource. So that's one for federal. For state, just about every state has its own. So let's face it, all you folks are in California, right? So you don't care what they're funding in Missouri or Montana, okay? So, um, so the state of California has a really good grant information site. It's called California Grants Portal. It's the same thing. Every Monday, I get a bunch of emails from them saying what they have. Very similar to grants.gov. And so that's how you can track the state and the federal stuff. Because, like I said, most of the search engines just aren't great with them. And then, although the AI stuff will pull that stuff up if you use AI. And I guess it's all different. I really like the Google AI. I forgot the name of it, but it's very handy. Um, and then local, and that's going to be, you're just going to have to stay on top of what's going on locally. There really aren't any aggregators of local grant funds. So it's research. So it's relationships, research. Finally, after you do all that, and that could take months, okay, to really do it right, okay, that then you're ready to submit proposals, you know, and that's where you just start doing it, and it just depends on how they're done. Um, a trend that I absolutely hate is how most of them have gone to online applications. I'm fine with online. I actually like the way the feds do it, which is you have the NOFO, and then you go onto grants.gov, and um, you go to the not the NOFO, but you go to what the thing is, okay? And then they give you a list. This is what we need, and you do it all in Word, and then convert it to a PDF, and you upload that. And you don't have to deal with all the BS of crashing and stupid word limits and blah blah blah. They'll have word limits, but they won't be stupid. So anyhow, I actually, I've written state and federal grants. I like the federal grants better. I think the state of California doesn't do a good job administering its grants. They outsource it to Submittable. I think Submittable sucks, and the feds do it themselves. And amazingly, they give you an 800 number. You can call that number, and there's a human being that answers it and knows what they're talking about. That's been historically my experience with the feds, as opposed to the state of California. Um, anyhow, they might require more information, although not really. They all want kind of the same thing. That brings me to the next thing, which is, what's the difference between a government grant application and a private grant application? And I think the biggest difference is private foundations and corporate funders, they want to be inspired. So the narrative is super important. Um, because, why should you give us money? And with government grants, I think it's not so much about inspiration because they've already decided, yeah, we're going to fund this. This is important. They've decided, the electeds, the legislature, the government decided this is important. They don't need to be inspired. For them, it's just the facts, man. And it's just a case of um, they're spending at taxpayers' money. Okay, they damn well better give it to groups that can deliver. So it's totally appropriate for them to be really, really meticulous in how they um, judge how you're going to do. And so all of you you've worked on government grants, it's like not enough to say we're going to do 12 community workshops. It's here's where they're going to be, here's the dates, and here's who's staffing them, and here's what each one costs. Right? It's that level of detail. So which, private funders generally aren't interested in that. So they want to know why it's inspiring, if it's a foundation, why it enhances their uh, vision and mission. If it's a corporation, why it supports what they do. That's why banks like to fund economic development because you're creating customers if you're doing it right. So that's the kind of thing. So that's sort of it. That's my, strategy. So like I said, it's like it's a strategy. I don't talk a lot about how to write a proposal because they're all different and it's all technical because it's really the important stuff of the things that come before it. So that's kind of it.
Larry, I think I missed one of the five. So I had down conceptualization, case for support, research warm prospects, submit proposals, and then what's the last one?
No, the between research warm and submit is research cold prospects.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank
And
you.
just a quick analysis or read on the funding climate. Yeah, the Feds forget it, and probably forget it until 2029. Okay, uh, at the earliest, right? And uh, the state is, I think Marcia mentioned before we started. Yeah, the state's got lots of funding. They've got all these bond measures. I know they have ratcheted back some of it, but a lot of it is still there. Um, they're fine when it comes to the bond measures or locally generated. Where they are having some difficulties is the federal pass-throughs they're not getting anymore. So that's cut into some of their stuff. Um, Private foundations, um, either progressive private foundations or foundations that care about the environment or social justice, environmental, any of that stuff. A lot of them, to their credit, have stepped into the breach. Now they don't have the massive funding that the feds have, and it depends on what you're doing. A lot of my clients are, community based. They're not looking for capital funds in the millions of dollars. They're looking for, 50,000, 100,000 for program. So, foundations have stepped in. They're just as pissed off as we are. And a lot of them have stepped in. They've increased their giving. They've increased their payout rate, et cetera, et cetera. So that's helped. Corporate funders, you just got to be careful with. Some of them are progressive, but there are only so many Ben and Jerry's, right? Um, they're cautious, right? And they don't like to take chances. So you got to be careful with how you talk about stuff. And a lot of that is going to be in your messaging to them. I have a client that does she runs a food bank and down in Long Beach and a hot meal program. Um, so, a lot of in the past, a lot of it was about, equity, disadvantaged communities of color, a lot of that verbiage that we've all heard and we're all used to hearing. Well, she's kind of soft pedaled that a bit, and now it's more about the classic widows and orphans type of thing, it's very non-political, it's very much about just, basic services and, you don't want to see kids starve, that kind of thing. Um, and that's what you may have to do with corporate funders, just to kind of, go easy on the philosophical and political stuff. Um, but they're still giving, the economy is doing really well. We've all heard about this K-shaped economy. So, the corporations, they're making money, the stock market is good. So the portfolios of the foundations are doing well. High net worth individuals that run these foundations or that are on these corporate foundation boards, they're doing okay. So, there's funding there. Um, and yeah, it's crazy. Things are crazy, but I don't think I think that I don't think that's a real problem. If the economy tanks, then you got a problem. Then we got a problem because they're not making money. But right now, things are okay.
So why don't we pause and see if folks have any questions? I do have one question I can kick things off with, and folks can either type something into the chat or you can raise your hand and then unmute and we'll add your question into the hopper here. So my question, Larry, is there might be organizations on this call or folks that watch this recording that want to apply, let's say, for a state grant that requires you spend the money and that then get reimbursed for it. And if you're a small nonprofit with not a big budget and they don't do advance payments
Yeah,
easily,
yeah,
what suggestions do you have for organizations that can't apply for those because they're constrained that way?
yeah. Well, there's two things. One, to pass. Um, to find a funder that'll bridge finance. So, for instance, some foundations will, and I'll take it a step further, but let me say this first. Some foundations will do, what they call PRIs, program related investments, where they'll loan you the money,
Hmm.
you know, especially if you have a contract,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And it depends on your bank. But your banks might even do that, especially if you're not talking gigantic amounts of money, because most of those reimbursement ones are not you do the whole thing and you get 50 grand at the end. It's like you do this every month you get, and the end of the month you send them a bill and you get $5,000 in 2 weeks or whatever.
Yep.
So they may lend you that, or they may let you open a line of credit,
Hmm.
because if you have a contract, that's your collateral.
Right.
So you could do that, or you may have a major donor who's willing to do that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah, that's how I do it.
That's
There are
great.
some of those, huh? I don't remember. I think I just isn't the I did a grant for this group not long ago for the what's called the OPC Ocean.
Ocean Protection Council.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that was a reimbursement. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. They just
Excellent.
had their 30 by 30. Yeah.
Yep. Anyone else have any other questions? All right, while folks find their mute button, I'll ask one more question. Is there a difference in writing a grant for a program versus like a land acquisition? Is the
Uh,
approach different?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, obviously the content is different and what you're talking about is different and the what do you call it? The metrics, the measurable is going to be different, but it's still going to be pretty much the same kind of thing.
Okay.
And, because at the end of the day, they're both about delivering on your mission.
Hmm.
And so and that's what's going to be important.
Tim, I noticed you nodding during some of this discussion. Do you have any questions directly?
No, I want to thank you, Larry. It's good to refresh this stuff and get serious about getting into the various steps, and you've done a good job of outlining it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. And
Yeah.
Marcia, I'll also look at you.
Um, Okay, so mine isn't so much with the mechanism uh of raising the money, but the kind of in-between step, and I'm talking about for land acquisition. You have somebody who the community has really pushed into wanting to be a willing seller or a possible willing seller. There's money for that sort of thing, for the kind of land acquisition we're talking about. And, but, the community groups have been pushing for that. They're not the ones that the landowner is interested in talking to. I mean, we've already, sort of had an oppositional relationship. So what do you do then? I mean, we've talked to one of our um I was very involved with Bolsa Chica. And when that happened, I mean, it was really the Interior Department we were talking about under Clinton who worked with us. And then with Bayona, it was really Trust for Public Land that came in and got an option and talked for quite some time before we actually got the deal, which ended up being more political than anything. But now we have a nearby parcel that's on the 30 by 30 list. And we've talked to one local conservancy and they say, well, get an appraisal done. But isn't it the conservancy or whoever it is that's doing the brokerage talk that you need to do that sort of work?
That's not my expertise. Land acquisition, when I was at TPL, I actually didn't really do much of that. My job was fundraising and PR and community relations and the setting up the urban parks program. All the uh, land stuff, that was all done out of San Francisco. So I don't know much about it, but what you're saying makes sense to me that somebody does an appraisal. Um, and then it's also more delicate because unless you can get the funder committed up front before there's an appraisal, to say, yeah, we're going to fund this thing or fund part of it or whatever. And that's good because then you take that to the landowner and say, we've got the backers lined up. They're just waiting for us to do the deal. Um, so that's where you get into, because you're probably not even doing an application yet. That's where you're into concept and messaging and getting your warm prospects lined up, who might be, government, you know, uh, state resources department, and like I said, nothing federal for a while, but state resources or the county or whoever. Um, and that's a case of you're cultivating a relationship with them so that they'll feel comfortable saying to you, yeah, we would be inclined to support this thing. What a lot of private funders will do is you'll go to them, you'll talk to them, and they'll say, yeah, we like you. Send us a proposal. And usually what that means is unless you send them something written in crayon, you're going to get the money. Okay, because they've already decided, yeah, they like these guys, and there may be some details to work out, and maybe an exact amount has to be worked out, but that they're committed to you. And the same thing would be with government agencies, and that's where it's going to, yeah, it's going to be political because you have to deal with the electeds who put pressure on the agencies, et cetera, et cetera. But you got your funding lined up. Now, as for me, I don't really do government relations anymore. I stopped doing that years ago.
You
I
were so
just,
good at it.
well, what's interesting? I aged out of it.
Mm.
Interesting. That is interesting.
Because all these politicians, these people, like half of them I never heard of, okay? And the other half, they were interns, in field offices when I was working. I mean, they were kids. And so they're all 20, 30 years younger than me. Um, I'm not the person that could relate to them. Uh, on a one-on-one. I mean, sure, I can talk to them, but you're going to want to send somebody that looks like them and acts like them to try to influence them. So after, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I saw the handwriting on the wall and I said, okay, I'm not going to do this stuff anymore. So now I do grant writing because frankly, nobody cares who you are or what you look like when you're, as long as you can deliver. So that's what I'm trying to do. So anyway, yeah, but that's how you have to do it. You get them, you'll get some kind of commitment, and then you can take that to the landowner and say, these guys, they're all ready to pony up if you got to deal with us. And there's going to be cart before the horse, because a lot of them say, well, we can't sign on the dotted line until you have a transaction, et cetera, et cetera. You know, that's what TPL did. That's their thing. They would get it and they would do what they called a buy and hold, and they hold a piece of property for a while and line up all the funding and then convey it over. That's what they did.
So, Marcia, I'm happy to have an offline conversation with you about that because I have been where you are. And we'll maybe have you answer one more question, Larry.
Okay.
Adam from the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy asks you to talk about using AI for cold prospect search. Are there best practices? Is there language or framing you want to use to get a good output on that
Yeah.
search you do?
Just be specific and, be natural. See, I start actually even before AI, I used to do this with regular Google. I would
Mm.
say, I would say, let me think of something. Uh, what are good tourist attractions in Arizona? And I type that in. And Google would give me all kinds of answers. Well, AI is even better. Using Google's AI, I forgot the name of it. Same thing. What are good tourist attractions in Arizona? And they'll give you great answers. And then you can ask follow-up questions. Which ones are good for kids? Which ones are good for old people that can't walk a lot or climb? etc. You could like keep going. You can keep pushing it. So on grant searching, I'll go back to this client I have in Long Beach. You know, there'll be a national funder. We're interested in Kresge, okay, which is based in Detroit. Um, and okay, so I'll Google, does Kresge fund um, food banks and hot meal programs? And the AI will tell me yes. And I'll say, give me a list who they are. Give me a list, type in, give me a list. And it'll give me a list, and then I'll look at that list and I'll see, and what I'll find with Kresge, because I did this recently, was they were all in Michigan. Okay, so Kresge is one of those fund. A lot of national funders are like this. They'll fund large national programs and projects. So Kresge will fund the Nature Conservancy or something like that to do national work. Okay, but they'll also fund local nonprofits, but almost always in their hometown. That's how a lot of these funders are. So a lot of the Bay Area funders are like that. So, and they'll have separate programs for those things. So, you just ask natural questions. I mean, the whole idea behind AI is like you're talking to a person. And a person that thinks really fast.
And
So,
has memorized the encyclopedia,
yeah,
apparently.
exactly. And so that's how you do it. Yeah,
Hmm. Larry, thank you so much for your time. We
sure,
really appreciate it. And
sure.
if folks have questions, do you mind if I put your email in our notes and
Yeah,
have them reach
yeah,
out to you?
yeah. Happy to talk to people in depth. You want to have a follow-up meeting or whatever, just, ask.
Okay, Great. Thank you, Larry. You take care. You're welcome to stay on for the rest of the meeting, or you can
That's okay.
call. Okay.
Otherwise, I'll see you at 3
Yeah, see you
o'clock.
at 3. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.